Robin Roberts. Picture this. You get the worst phone call of your life on a Tuesday. Cancer. The kind of word that stops the room. And the very next morning, you're sitting under studio lights, makeup done, microphone clipped on, looking into a camera and saying, "Good morning," to millions of people, like nothing happened at all. Now, most of us would take a week off, a month off, maybe never come back. But one woman did the opposite, twice, and in doing so, became one of the most trusted faces in American television. Her name is Robin Roberts. And if you've ever flipped on the morning news to get your day started, there's a good chance her voice has been part of your routine at some point over the last 3 decades. But here's the thing, behind that calm, warm, everything's going to be okay presence is a story that's anything but calm. It's raw, it's messy. It's the kind of story that makes you sit up a little straighter and ask yourself, could I have done what she did? So let's rewind. Because to understand how someone builds that kind of strength, you have to go back to where it started. A tiny town on the Mississippi coast, long before any camera ever pointed her way. Robin was actually born in Tuskegee, Alabama, back in November of 1960. But it was Pass Christian, Mississippi, a small, salty little town right on the Gulf, that really raised her. And her home life was no joke. Her dad, Lawrence Roberts, was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. Let that sink in for a second. This was a man who flew combat missions for a country that, at the time, still wasn't fully willing to treat him as an equal citizen. That kind of quiet dignity doesn't just disappear, it gets passed down. In that house, excellence wasn't a goal, it was simply expected. Then there was her mom, Lucy Marion Roberts. And honestly, if this story has a heartbeat, it's her. She had this one phrase she said over and over, so often that it basically became the family motto. Everybody's got something. Not as a way of feeling sorry for yourself. Quite the opposite. It was permission to keep going, no matter what showed up on your doorstep. Robin was the youngest of 4 kids, and she grew up watching her siblings, watching her parents, absorbing this idea that faith and toughness weren't separate things. They worked together. And she was an athlete from day one. Not just for fun, she played to win. Tennis, basketball, track, you name it, she competed like it mattered, because to her, it did. Long before she ever sat behind a news desk, sports taught her the one skill that would define her entire life: how to perform your best, exactly when the pressure is worst. She took that competitive fire to Southeastern Louisiana University, where she played basketball for the Lady Lions. She graduated in 1983 with a communications degree, and from there, she did what almost nobody in this business gets to skip. She paid her dues. Small TV station in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, then Biloxi, then Nashville, then Atlanta. Every stop was another rung on the ladder, and at every stop, people noticed the same thing. This woman wasn't performing warmth for the camera. She actually had it. The camera was just catching up to what was already there. By 1990, a sports network took a chance on her, and for the better part of the next decade and a half, she covered everything: the NBA, the NFL, college football, Wimbledon, the Olympics. Keep in mind, this was an era when the sports broadcasting world wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for women, let alone a black woman who knew the game inside and out. She didn't wait for permission, she just kept being undeniably good until the industry had no choice but to catch up. In the mid-90s, a morning show came calling, and what started as an occasional contributor spot slowly turned into something much bigger. By 2005, she was named co-anchor of that broadcast, sitting at one of the most watched desks in the country. And under her, the show didn't just hold steady, it grew. People didn't just watch her, they trusted her. The same way you trust a friend who tells you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Then came June of 2012. And this is where the story takes its first gut punch turn. That particular morning was supposed to be a pure celebration. The ratings had just come in, confirming that her show had officially overtaken its biggest rival after 16 straight years of losing that race. 16 years. That's the kind of milestone people frame and hang on a wall. The whole staff was celebrating. And that same day, her doctors called with different news entirely. But to really understand what that call meant, we've got to rewind 5 years earlier, to the summer of 2007. Robin was 46, at the absolute peak of her career, when a routine mammogram came back with anything but a routine result: breast cancer. And here's what she did with that news. Instead of quietly disappearing to handle it in private, she sat down at her own desk, looked into her own camera, and told her audience the truth herself. No press release, no spokesperson, just her, being honest about being scared. "I was scared," she admitted later, "but I figured if I was scared, somebody watching at home was scared too, and maybe if they saw me deal with it, they'd go get checked themselves." She had a lumpectomy, went through radiation, and somehow kept working through most of it. And the response was massive. Women all over the country wrote in saying they'd booked their own mammograms because of her. Some caught things early because of it. She'd taken the worst news of her life and turned it into something that helped strangers. That wasn't a PR strategy. That was just her mother's voice. Everybody's got something, playing out in real time. By 2008, treatment was done, and life went back to something like normal. She figured the hardest chapter was behind her. She had no idea her own blood was quietly building toward round 2. Which brings us back to that day in June 2012, the celebration day. The doctors explained that the chemo she'd had 5 years earlier carried a rare but known risk: damage to bone marrow. And that risk had caught up with her in the form of a condition called myelodysplastic syndrome, or MDS, a disease where your bone marrow basically stops doing its job properly. Left untreated, it's fatal. She was 51 years old, and this time, there was no scheduling treatment around her show. A bone marrow transplant meant stepping away entirely, months of isolation, a weakened immune system, and essentially rebuilding her body from the ground up. Once again, she told her audience herself. Once again, she sat at that desk and said it plainly. She was sick, she was going to fight, and she needed a donor. And once again, the country responded. Donor registrations spiked practically overnight. But the match she needed wasn't a stranger. It was her own sister, Sally Ann Roberts, also a longtime television journalist. When they tested her and found she was compatible, Sally Ann didn't hesitate for a second. "She's my sister," she said simply. There was nothing to decide. What Sally Ann gave her wasn't just a medical procedure, it was, quite literally, more life. Robin stepped away from her show in September 2012. She'd be gone for close to 6 months. What happened during that stretch never made it to television, and honestly, it's hard to fully describe from the outside. Total isolation. A body deliberately stripped down to nothing so it could be rebuilt. Days of pain that most of us will thankfully never have to understand. And in the middle of all that waiting, her mother died. Lutza Marion passed away in August of 2012, at 88 years old, right as her youngest daughter was preparing for the most dangerous procedure of her life. There's really no good way to describe that kind of timing. Robin has talked about it since with real tenderness. The loss never got smaller, it just changed shape over time. Her mother never got to see her walk back into that studio. But the philosophy she'd given her daughter, that suffering isn't a sign you've been abandoned, just a sign you're human, went into that hospital room and stayed there. So here's the real question. What do you do when grief shows up at the exact moment you have absolutely nothing left to give, and you still have to find a way through the night? The transplant worked. Those 2 words carry a lot more weight than they seem to on paper. Because a bone marrow transplant isn't a guaranteed fix. It's a huge gamble against very tough odds. And recovery isn't measured in weeks. It's measured in months, one blood test at a time. There were brutal days in that hospital room. Days where her body was fighting to accept something completely new, layered on top of the emotional weight of a life that was completely paused and completely out of her hands. But she didn't just sit there and wait to be a patient. She wrote. She reflected. She started to figure out, in that forced stillness, what she actually believed about suffering and purpose. The same instinct that had made her go public with both diagnoses in the first place. She wasn't inventing a message, she was digging one out of the wreckage. And then, on February 20th, 2013, she walked back into that studio. That morning became one of the most watched moments in the show's history. Not because anyone said anything dramatic, but because of what the image itself said. A woman who'd survived 2 cancers, a bone marrow transplant, and the death of her mother, all inside the same brutal stretch of time, sat back down at her desk, looked into the camera, and simply said, "Good morning." Her co-host could barely get a sentence out. The audience cried. She didn't. She just smiled, the specific kind of smile you only get from someone who paid an enormous price for the right to sit in that chair and knows exactly what it cost. She later summed it up in a line that's stuck with a lot of people since. "Make your mess your message. I had a big mess, so I figured I had a big message." That phrase took on a life of its own. Repeated by cancer patients, by people going through recoveries that had nothing to do with illness, by anyone standing at the edge of something awful and looking for a way to make sense of it. Here's the thing people miss, though. The story doesn't actually end at that comeback moment. Because surviving all of that didn't just send her back to work. It changed how she lived, period. In December of 2013, she came out publicly, not with a big announcement, just a quiet Facebook post at the end of the year, thanking the people who'd supported her through everything. Among them was her partner of 10 years at that point, Amber Lane, who Robin credited with getting her through the toughest stretch of her life. She hadn't hidden that relationship out of shame. She'd simply kept it private, the same way she kept everything private, until she felt sharing it could actually help somebody else. Amber had been there for both cancer fights, the transplant, the isolation, her mother's death, all of it, in the most unglamorous, day-to-day way possible. And then, in a strange twist, in 2021, Amber received her own breast cancer diagnosis. The person who'd nursed Robin through 2 brutal recoveries was now facing one of her own. And Robin didn't go anywhere. She showed up with the kind of first-hand understanding that you simply can't fake. Amber finished treatment and recovered. 2 years later, in 2023, the 2 of them got married in a small, private ceremony surrounded by the people who'd been there through it all. It took 20 years together, 2 cancer battles between them, a bone marrow transplant, and the loss of a parent to get to that day. It wasn't some fairy tale, it was something sturdier than that. These days, she's in her 60s, still sitting behind that same desk most mornings, and something about her is different than it would have been if none of this had ever happened. Not worn down, clarified. She's talked openly about maintaining her own space, even within the marriage, living in a way that fits 2 people with full, busy lives, rather than forcing some picture-perfect version of togetherness. She's arrived somewhere most people never get to, fully aware of exactly what her mornings cost her, and fully intent on not wasting a single one of them. So if you ask her, and people have asked her this in 100 different ways over the years, how does she keep going? The answer always traces back to that same kitchen table in Mississippi, and her mother's voice saying everybody's got something. Not as an excuse to give up, as a reminder that having hard things happen to you isn't proof your life went wrong, it's just proof your life is real. The good ones, the ones that actually mean something, aren't built by avoiding the hard stuff. They're built by deciding, over and over, to keep moving through it anyway. She made that decision on a random Tuesday in 2007, when she chose to sit at her desk the very next morning. She made it again in 2012, when the best professional news of her life landed on the exact same day as the scariest medical news. She made it in a hospital room that same year, carrying her mother's voice into a place her mother could no longer follow her. And she's made it every single morning since, showing up, saying good morning, and meaning it. So here's a question worth sitting with. What does showing up look like in your own life, on the days you least feel like doing it? Drop your answer below. I'd genuinely love to hear it. And if this kind of story is the kind of thing you want more of, go ahead and hit subscribe, because there are plenty more stories like this one still to tell.